My husband thought I would never find out. Until his phone rang during dinner. Welcome, this is Voice of Deborah and I tell true life stories. I watched my husband's face drain of all color as his phone lit up on the dinner table. The name flashing across the screen made my blood run cold. Not because I didn't recognize it, but because I did. It was my doctor. The one I'd seen 3 days ago for what I thought was a routine checkup. The one whose office my husband had absolutely no reason to be in contact with. Aren't you going to answer that, Michael? I asked, my fork frozen halfway to my mouth. He grabbed the phone so fast he nearly knocked over his wine glass. It's probably a wrong number. But his hands were shaking. And that's when I knew. After 23 years of marriage, after building a life together, after trusting him with every vulnerable part of me, that the man sitting across from me was hiding something that could destroy everything. My name is Catherine Brennan, and I'm 51 years old. 3 weeks ago I thought I had the perfect life. I was a high school English teacher with a modest pension building up, a beautiful home in the suburbs of Portland, and a husband who still kissed me goodbye every morning before heading to his accounting firm downtown. Michael had always been the steady one, the reliable one. When my mother died 5 years ago and left me a small inheritance, $180,000, he'd been the one to suggest we invest it wisely. Let me handle it, Kath, he'd said, holding my hands as I cried over the loss. You're grieving. Let me take care of the financial details. I'd signed the papers he put in front of me without reading them too carefully. He was my husband, my partner. Why would I question him? That phone call at dinner was 3 days ago. But the real story, the one that nearly cost me everything, started 6 weeks earlier. It was a Saturday morning in October when I noticed the first strange thing. I'd woken up early to make pancakes, and Michael's phone was charging on the kitchen counter. It buzzed with a text message, and the preview made me pause mid-batter pour. Tomorrow, 3 p.m. Don't forget the documents. The sender's name was just a phone number. No contact name. When Michael came downstairs, I mentioned it casually. Honey, someone texted you about documents and a 3 p.m. meeting tomorrow? The look that flashed across his face lasted maybe half a second, but I caught it. Panic. Pure, undiluted panic. Then he smiled. Oh, that's just Jerry from the firm. New client meeting. You know how it is during tax season prep. Except it wasn't tax season. It was October. I told myself I was being paranoid. Michael had never given me a reason not to trust him. Sure, we'd had our rough patches. What couple married for over 2 decades hasn't? But infidelity or deception? That wasn't him. But then I started noticing other things. He'd come home late 3 nights that week, claiming overtime at the office. His phone was suddenly password protected, when it never had been before. And when I suggested we finally take that trip to Greece we'd been planning for years, he'd hemmed and hawed about cash flow issues. Cash flow issues. We both had good salaries. We had my mother's inheritance invested. We should have been comfortable. Michael, maybe we should sit down and go over our finances together, I suggested one evening. I haven't really looked at the statements since you took over the investment accounts. His jaw tightened. Catherine, I'm a CPA. I think I know how to manage our money. Don't you trust me? And there it was. The line designed to make me feel guilty for questioning him. But something in my gut twisted. And women's intuition. It's real. A week later, I went for my annual checkup with Dr. Marianne Chen, my physician of 8 years. Everything seemed routine until she sat down with a concerned look on her face. Catherine, I need to talk to you about something sensitive, she began. 3 weeks ago, someone called our office claiming to be calling on your behalf, asking detailed questions about your health, your prescriptions, and specifically about any terminal diagnoses. My stomach dropped. Terminal diagnoses. I'm healthy. Why would? That's what concerned us. The caller, a man, said he was your husband and that you'd asked him to get information because you were too upset to call yourself. He wanted to know about life expectancy, treatment options, and how quickly certain conditions could progress. The room started spinning. But I don't have any terminal condition. I know. That's why I'm telling you. We didn't give him any information, of course. But Catherine, why would your husband be calling to ask if you were dying? I drove home in a daze, Dr. Chen's words echoing in my skull. The inheritance, the sudden need for passwords, the mysterious meetings. And now this. Michael calling my doctor, fishing for information about whether I was terminally ill. There was only one reason someone would do that. He was waiting for me to die. But what he didn't know was that I was perfectly healthy. And whatever plan he'd set in motion was based on a timeline that didn't exist. That's when the real fear set in. Because if Michael was expecting me to die naturally and I wasn't, would he try to help things along? I didn't confront him. Not yet. Instead, I became someone I'd never been before. Suspicious, calculating, and very, very careful. I started watching everything he did. I noticed he'd been buying my favorite wine, a specific vintage of Malbec, and always insisted on pouring my glass himself at dinner. I noticed he'd been encouraging me to take evening walks alone in our neighborhood, even though it had gotten dark earlier with the season change. I noticed that our life insurance policies, which I'd barely paid attention to when we updated them 2 years ago, had been changed. Mine had been increased to $750,000. I discovered this by doing something I never thought I'd do, going through his locked filing cabinet while he was in the shower. The key was taped under his desk drawer, and inside I found a folder labeled Estate Planning. Inside were documents I'd apparently signed. Documents I didn't remember signing. A life insurance policy with me as the insured and Michael as the sole beneficiary. Investment statements showing my mother's $180,000 inheritance had been moved into high-risk stocks that had, conveniently, lost almost 70% of their value. And a handwritten note that made my blood freeze. After C passes, consolidate accounts. Full house. Estimate total liquid assets. $920,000. That night at dinner, the night his phone rang, I'd been planning to play it cool. To gather more evidence. Maybe even to call a lawyer first thing Monday morning. But then Dr. Chen's office called him. And he'd answered it in the bathroom. His voice low and urgent. When he came back, his face was pale and his hands were still trembling. Who was that? I asked innocently, taking a sip of the wine he'd poured for me earlier. Except I hadn't actually drunk any of it. I'd been dumping my wine into the potted plant beside the dining room table for the past week, just to be safe. Wrong number, he muttered. Michael. My voice came out harder than I'd intended. I know you called my doctor's office 3 weeks ago, pretending to ask about terminal diagnoses. I know you've been waiting for me to die. And I know about the insurance policy and what happened to my mother's inheritance. The silence that followed was deafening. Then something shifted in his expression. The mask of the loving, concerned husband slipped away, and what was underneath made me realize I'd been sleeping next to a stranger for years. You weren't supposed to find out this way, he said quietly. It would have been easier if you hadn't. What Michael told me over the next 20 minutes destroyed everything I thought I knew about my marriage. 2 years ago he'd started gambling. Online poker, sports betting, cryptocurrency schemes. He'd lost almost everything, not just our savings but money he'd embezzled from his firm. He was facing federal charges, prison time, and financial ruin. Then my mother died and left me that inheritance. It wasn't enough to cover what I owed, he said, as casually as if he were discussing the weather. But your life insurance, that would solve everything. I could pay back the firm, pay off my debts, and disappear before the investigation closed in. So you were going to kill me? It wasn't a question. He didn't answer directly. I thought you were sick. You'd mentioned being tired, having headaches. I thought maybe it would happen naturally and I just needed to wait. But then Dr. Chen's office called me back today and told me you'd been in asking why I was inquiring about your health, and they confirmed you were perfectly fine. And I realized. He trailed off, but I finished the sentence in my head. He realized he'd have to take matters into his own hands. "Catherine, we can work this out," he said, standing up from the table. "Let's talk about this reasonably." But I'd already grabbed my phone and was backing toward the door. "Don't come near me. Don't be dramatic. I'm not going to hurt you. I just need. You need me dead." My voice came out as a scream. "You've been planning to murder me." His expression hardened. I didn't want it to come to this. He moved fast. Faster than I expected from a 53-year-old man with a desk job. He grabbed my wrist, and my phone clattered to the floor. We struggled, and I realized with horrifying clarity that this was really happening. My husband, the man I'd shared a bed with for 23 years, was actually going to try to kill me. I did the only thing I could think of. I screamed, loud and long, hoping our neighbors would hear. And then I fought back. What Michael didn't know, what I'd discovered just that morning when I finally worked up the courage to open the envelope that had arrived in the mail 3 days earlier, was that someone had been watching him too. 2 months ago, a woman named Jennifer Reeves had contacted me through Facebook. Her message was brief. "I think we should talk about Michael. Call me." I dismissed it as spam or a mistaken identity. But after the doctor's appointment, I'd called her back. Jennifer Reeves was a forensic accountant hired by Michael's firm to investigate discrepancies in client accounts. She'd discovered Michael's embezzlement and had been building a case against him for months. But more than that, she'd also discovered he'd done this before. His first wife, Amanda, had died 12 years ago in a tragic accident involving prescription medication. She'd left him $200,000 in life insurance. The investigation at the time had gone nowhere. Jennifer had been trying to reach me for weeks, but Michael had been intercepting my mail and monitoring my email. The only way she'd been able to get through was social media, which Michael hadn't thought to check. The envelope that had arrived 3 days ago contained copies of everything: bank records, insurance policies, evidence of the embezzlement, and a police report about Amanda's death that had never been fully investigated. Jennifer had also included a small device, a recording pen that looked like an ordinary ballpoint. I'd been wearing it clipped to my sweater all evening. As Michael's hands closed around my arms, I heard the most beautiful sound in the world: police sirens. "What did you do?" Michael hissed. "I called them before you even got home," I said, my voice shaking but clear. "I told them everything. And I've been recording this entire conversation." The look of betrayal on his face would have been comical if the situation weren't so terrifying. The police burst through our front door. I'd left it unlocked deliberately. Within minutes, Michael was in handcuffs, and I was giving my statement to Detective Sarah Morrison, who'd been coordinating with Jennifer Reeves for the past week. The next few months were a blur of police statements, legal proceedings, and therapy sessions. Michael was charged with attempted murder, embezzlement, fraud, and they reopened the investigation into Amanda's death. Jennifer Reeves became an unlikely ally. She'd suspected Michael for months but needed concrete evidence and, more importantly, needed to keep me safe while building the case. She'd worked with police to monitor our house, tap our phone lines with a warrant, and document Michael's increasingly desperate behavior. The wine I'd been dumping into the plant. The lab found traces of Ambien in it. Not enough to kill me, but enough to make me drowsy and disoriented. Michael's plan had apparently been to stage an accident. Maybe a fall down the stairs. Maybe a car crash on one of those evening walks he kept encouraging me to take. The investigation revealed that my mother's inheritance hadn't been lost in bad investments. It had been gambled away and used to pay Michael's mounting debts. But because he'd forged my signature on documents moving the money into joint accounts he controlled, I was able to recover some of it through the courts. Amanda's death was ruled a homicide, and Michael faced additional charges. At his trial 8 months later, I sat in the gallery and watched the man I'd once loved be sentenced to 35 years in prison. No possibility of parole for the first 20. He never looked at me. Not once. The forensic psychiatrist who evaluated him testified that Michael was a narcissist with sociopathic tendencies who saw people, including his wives, as resources to be exploited and discarded when they were no longer useful. I'd been married to a monster and never knew it. I'm writing this from my new apartment across town. It's smaller than the house Michael and I shared, but it's mine. Truly mine. I took a semester of medical leave from teaching to process everything, but I'm back in the classroom now. My students don't know what I went through, and that's how I want it. To them, I'm just Mrs. Brennan, the English teacher who's maybe a little stricter about deadlines, but who also sometimes shares hard-won wisdom about trusting your instincts. I've learned so many lessons from this nightmare. I learned that love doesn't mean blind trust. Healthy relationships should be transparent. I learned that financial literacy isn't optional, even if you're married to someone who handles money for a living. I learned that when something feels wrong, it probably is. Most importantly, I learned that I'm stronger than I ever imagined. I survived a predator who'd successfully killed before. I outsmarted someone who thought he was the smartest person in the room. And I'm still here. Here's something I never told the police, the lawyers, or even Jennifer Reeves. 3 months before Michael's arrest, I'd updated my own will. Something had been nagging at me. Not enough to accuse him of anything concrete, but enough to make me cautious. I'd left everything to my sister, Claire, and I'd included a letter to be opened only in the event of my unexpected death. In that letter, I'd written down every suspicious thing Michael had done, every weird feeling I'd had, and explicit instructions to investigate him thoroughly if anything happened to me. I'd hidden a copy of this letter in 3 different locations: my sister's house, my school office, and my best friend Mara's safe deposit box. Call it paranoia. Call it insurance. But that letter meant that even if Michael had succeeded in killing me, he wouldn't have gotten away with it. Sometimes the best revenge is survival. And sometimes survival requires planning for the worst while hoping for the best. If you're watching this and you've felt that gut feeling, that something's not right with someone you trust, please don't ignore it. I almost did. I almost talked myself out of my own suspicions because confronting them felt too scary, too dramatic, too unthinkable. But unthinkable things happen every day. Protect yourself. Guard your finances. Pay attention to changes in behavior. And never, ever sign documents without reading them thoroughly, no matter who's asking you to trust them. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. And remember, your instincts exist for a reason. I'm Catherine Brennan. I'm 51 years old. And I'm still here to tell this story because I trusted that small voice inside me that said something was wrong. Trust yours too. And remember, sometimes the person sleeping next to you is hiding secrets that could destroy you. But here's the thing they don't count on. You're stronger than they think. Smarter than they assume. And survival, that's the ultimate victory. Stay safe out there. And never stop questioning.